Hello everyone, welcome to webinar this evening. Today we have amongst us Mr. Rajendra Kaloor, who is the director with CFA Society, comes with 20 years of experience in the investment advisory and wealth management industry. Of late, we have seen two big new regulations announced by SEBI. There was a lot talk going on in terms of a lot of consultation papers since 2013-14 onwards towards RIA guidelines, registered investment advisory guidelines. Finally, the firm regulations have come into place, and these regulations are going to be applicable from 1st October 2020. Parallelly, there was a talk going on in terms of standardizing the way portfolio management services measure and present their returns. That has also been kind of now regularized, and the method that is being suggested by SEBI is TWRR method. So in this particular session from Rajendra Kaloor, we will be understanding the implications of both these changes, as well as how they ultimately help construct the overall ecosystem and make the entire investment advisory and portfolio management industry to be transparent and more conducive for investors. In this entire session, we will be understanding how TWRR, which is the way of managing portfolio management returns, is going to be different from GIPS, which is the global standards of portfolio management. In third session, we will be taking questions and answers. We have received lots of questions on email, especially with regards to the RIA guidelines, and that we'll be covering in the last part. So in total, we are going to dedicate around 1 hour and 20 minutes to this session. So we'll kind of try and divide, this 1 hour 20 minutes into 3 parts. Over to you, Rajendra. You're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kamal. That's a good reminder. Thanks for getting me to start. And thanks, Kamal and PMS AI World for this invite. I'm grateful to them. And as somebody who is in charge of the Research and Advocacy Committee at the CFA Society India. In fact, we have been engaging with the regulators over both the issues, both the PMS and registered investment advisory guidelines, and over a period of time. And we're really grateful for SEBI that finally they have taken this big leap forward in both these regulations, and about time too. For example, if I can tell you, in case of portfolio management services, the first set of regulations came in 1993. And since then, there wasn't much of changes in terms of the overall operational structure, the business model, or the reporting framework. And internationally, of course, there are standards of presenting performance presentations to the clients, and we never really had that. And each one was to his or her own in terms of providing those standards. But finally, I think SEBI has taken that step forward in terms of introducing the time-weighted rate of return. Not just that, in terms of the overall mandating the PMS providers to adopt an investment approach, and aggregating the styles and then looking at performances. I think they are clearly looking at integrating with the global segregated management of funds standards. So in a way, I think both of them are positive developments, and I think we should welcome them. But at the same time, we need to be cautious, because these are just a step forward, and these don't really, by any means, are the best-in-class practices yet. So while it is a big step forward, I would say that these are early days, and let's look at them in a sense that let's distill them. Let's analyze in terms of how they are in terms of the best practices in the world, and go ahead and look at them. Of course, for India, it's a giant leap forward, particularly for the PMS, and we will look at it because there's already an early question from Akhil. And Akhil, I think part of your questions are already in the presentation. So please feel free once the presentation is over and in the question and answer session if I need to elaborate more on this. Yeah. So let's get ahead. And the kind of structure that we have devised, I think with Kamal's introduction being over, it's going to be a 40-minute slide presentation largely. And in the slides, we would be covering these aspects. And beyond that, there would be a 15-minute question and answers session. So that's, I think, the brief that is given in this 1 hour, what we need to cover. But we have a fair ground to cover, so let's get underway as fast as possible. So the regulation of intermediaries, and let me tell you this, that regulation of intermediaries, SEBI has approached it fairly reluctantly right from the beginning because of the sheer volume of numbers that SEBI has to regulate. It's one thing regulating the, I would say, the asset management companies, but at the same time, if or the listed stock exchanges, etc. But regulating lakhs of intermediaries, I think, is something that SEBI is not prepared for. So each time that the intermediary regulation comes in, then specifically getting to administer and manage them, I think SEBI has always tried to keep a hands-off approach and made either the AMFI or the exchanges responsible for regulating them. And we should consider why it is as we go ahead. So let's also, before we understand what are the best practices, we also need to look at who is a fiduciary, understand what exactly is the meaning of fiduciary in this entire scheme of things. We'll also look at the original RIA regulations and then the revised ones that have come in with the SEBI notifying them. Then we'll look at RIA regulations in select countries, PMS regulations, that would be the section 2 of that, and then the soft touch and hard touch regulations that typically SEBI has, and what are these. Then we will look at regulations of performance presentation, then the GIPS versus, that's the global the investment performance standards, that's largely introduced by CFA Institute, but actually it's a independent body and a fairly autonomous body that looks at client portfolio presentation standards versus SEBI's presentation standard. And where does SEBI has taken the step forward, where does it still has to improve on. We will look at that, and then of course, and we will look at questions. So MF regulations. So let's look at MF regulations and the flaw in the current model. And as you could see in terms of the MF regulations is, we have the intermediaries here, we have the product manufacturers here, and the investors. And it's no surprise that there are potential issues around this model, where the products providers provide the training to the intermediaries, provide the fees and commissions, and then we look at the intermediaries providing them with sales and the AUM, and as well as intermediaries thriving on the fees and commissions, and then looking at to advise service ideas. So this is really fraught with problems, and the model itself is fairly flawed, and there are issues that it gives rise to, like the principal agent problem, as well as the sales bias and the product bias, and ultimately from a provider basis, it's a provider bias as well as a vertical integration. And we have seen this, and we have straddled this entire spectrum in a fair bit. So I won't cover this much, just to leave you with a thought of what is the flaw in the current model. So let's also describe who is a true fiduciary. A true fiduciary is somebody who will give the best advice, provide the best execution at the best price, with complete transparency and minimum conflict of interest. So I think that's a true fiduciary, and we know how difficult it is to really maintain that. I still, as a true fiduciary, also I don't believe that he or she can be completely free of conflict, and hence this term of minimum conflict of interest. As long as the fiduciary can provide the best of advice with the best of execution at the best of price, and along with that provide the complete transparency, then we believe there is a true fiduciary. And we know it's almost, even with the new set of RIA regulations, it's difficult to really implement this in the true sense of the term. So let's look at, from a RIA regulation perspective, what are the timeline of key regulations and how has it is gone. SEBI was itself established in 1992. Then the mutual fund regulations came in 1993. The front-end load ban came in 2009. And finally, in 2013, there was some attempt to regulate intermediaries through an RIA regulation and direct plans that came in 2013. And then 2016, the enhanced disclosures and TRs and commissions that came in. And then 2017, the products were recategorized and almost like straight jacketing in terms of the product, so that the AMCs have the less of flexibility in terms of managing the products, and this means that the AMCs would be as far as possible true to label in terms of the products. And then in 2018, there is this capping of commissions and upfront ban that came in. And then 2020, finally, after a series, as Kamal pointed out, a series of consultation papers, finally we came in with a revised RIA regulations, which is fairly comprehensive, but I would still say that this is still not the full job done. So the regulation of intermediaries prior to global financial crisis, even abroad, the intermediary regulation wasn't in focus. It was even there, it was fairly half-hearted. It's only after global financial crisis that people realize that misallocation of assets is a very, very big industry-wide phenomenon. And this was the misallocation of assets is what really makes people lose wealth in a big sense of the term. And that really came into focus in the GFC, when a lot of clients lost a lot of money. Not only that, I think there was no regulation in terms of even understanding what is a sophisticated product and what is not a sophisticated product. We have cases in UK as well as Hong Kong, where people at the counters, at the tellers were selling products like structured products, etc., and enabling clients to leverage. So this was the phenomenon that really was difficult to believe now, but this was happening pre-2008 days. So in a sense that the client suitability and appropriateness test came in only much later, after 2008. Prior to that, it was a rudimentary compliance kind of a tick box that was happening. So increased awareness, of course, post 2008, when you lose a lot of money, clients themselves become more informed. They take a great deal of effort in terms of making themselves informed. That also played an important role in intermediary regulation. Not only that, regulators across the world, there was a fair bit of, I think, a consensus as well as coordination in terms of how to approach this intermediary regulation. So you could see that around the same time, there was a lot of regulations happening across, like UK, Australia, US, Singapore, Hong Kong, India. So in a sense that, but there was a global coordination thanks to IOSCO, where these regulators meet, and hence it wasn't really standalone and isolated, though actual implementation as well as the actual regulations that came in were much different and varied from country to country. In India, SEBI is keen that entities like stock exchanges or AMFI take up the role of intermediary regulation. We have seen that one such attempt that had happened in terms of asking AMFI to take up, and then it went to court and it got scotched, then it got delayed. And now recently, I think SEBI is said to have asked the stock exchanges to start regulating RIAs. We need to see where it goes. And of course, with intermediaries dependent on product commissions, regulators realize that a new set of intermediaries need to be brought in, and that's where the fiduciary approach or the RIA regulations came in 1993. In UK, we have that retail distribution review that also I think played a part in terms of UK's regulations. Then in US, we had the Department of Labor's fiduciary approach, and where they actually defined fiduciary, and they brought in, but that got diluted after 2016 when the new president came to power. So a look at 1993 regulations, where basically it was a half-hearted attempt, I must say. It was something where SEBI did provide a new category to come through, but there were a lot of checks and balances on that. There were hardly any incentives for the new the channel to really come and become a significant player. And then there was a lot of dilution of these regulations, so many people didn't feel it worthwhile to really look at it pretty seriously. So the first set of regulations came in with a lot of exceptions, as I mentioned. A significant number of RIA licenses were not private financial planners or wealth managers. They were more of stock traders, and that's where I think the worry and the fear of SEBI came in terms of it didn't really envisage that the RIA license will almost be hijacked by stock traders, and very few of the wealth managers or financial planners will come in and apply for these licenses. And that's largely because SEBI allowed to have dual business models, and they allowed the commission model to not only be there, but thrive with much lesser regulation and much lesser compliances. So in a sense, the moment you take a RIA license, you stand up to all sorts of scrutiny and subject to all sorts of audit. But if you are an intermediary as a broker or a mutual fund distributor, you have hardly anybody scrutinizing you. And then, of course, a lot of professionals were exempt from RIA license if they provide incidental advice, etc. Some large players like banks, because of the regulatory, I would say regulatory limitation that SEBI had, they were kept out of the pale. And there was a confusion also in terms of the scope of activities, whether RIAs can do profit sharing, whether they can execute or simply give advice. I think there were a lot of these gray areas, and there was no clear distinction or explanation for what RIAs can do and cannot do. And again, what is the clarity of fees? What are the limitations? There was no prescription in the 1993 regulations. So the new regulations, of course, gives clarity to RIA business while allowing, again, it allows both models to coexist, especially in the corporate level. Both models can coexist together. But yes, it makes a distinction and says that at a client level, there has to be a clear distinction. And if a client is advisory, then they cannot be, execute, or they cannot be, the business cannot be conducted through a distributor or vice versa. So one can't call oneself an advisor without RIA license. So that's also a step forward. So it removed all these anomalies and gray areas that were there in the earlier, some of them, and made it more clear. Allows execution under direct code. Also allows some of these PMS and IIF product providers to launch products without brokerage. Raises the net worth criteria and allows some serious players to come in. And at the individual level, it clearly says that you can't be a distributor and an advisor both. And of course, there is a scope of cover that is clearly spelled out. Of course, it falls short of strict fiduciary standards. Confusion still exists on the fee models, and there is no standardization of presentation standards for the advisor. So that's largely in terms of mutual funds that we have seen. But let's now go, I think, the great interest that I have seen. I'm going through the questions, and I think largely it's the PMS regulations, I think, that interests many of you. And let's get into it in some detail. Now, evolution of PMS regulations. And SEBI, as I mentioned to you, there are certain products where SEBI said that these are products that are fit for soft touch regulations. Now, what is this soft touch regulation and hard touch regulations? The regulations which have the implication for retail investors are deemed to be hard touch. For example, mutual funds, for example, where every aspect of mutual funds is thoroughly scrutinized and regulated. But PMS, SEBI felt that it was meant for sophisticated investors. And in SEBI's term, sophisticated investor is somebody who can afford to invest, say, 25 lakhs. Earlier it was 5 lakhs, and then it's now moved to 50 lakhs. So say for SEBI, that is what it is. But clearly, that is where I think SEBI again falls short in terms of defining the eligible investor only through ticket size, because ticket size doesn't take into account the overall exposure, overall net worth levels of the clients, as well as the actual awareness of the products or the sophistication of the client in understanding those products. So in the Western parlance and other countries more developed, they have something called an accredited investor, which takes into account the exposure levels, the experience levels of the clients, as well as the qualifications of the clients. For example, in US, if somebody is a CFA charter holder, he's clearly an accredited investor by virtue of that qualification. But here SEBI has only one criteria, that even though in the consultation and various discussions we did discuss in terms of clearly identifying who should be an accredited investor, but SEBI has let it go for now. I think over a period it would come in. But I think then the SEBI realized, because of the rapid growth of the PMS market as well, that it can't let go and be only playing soft ball with the PMS providers. So after, I think, a fair bit of hesitancy, since 93, the clear regulations that have got revised is now. So it's taken almost 27 years for SEBI to drastically overhaul these PMS regulations. And what has it done in terms of that? Let's get ahead and see. So the key features of revised regulations that SEBI has undertaken now is that, one, ticket size it has enhanced, and of course, rightly so. But we felt that more than the ticket size, it should have gone ahead and defined more broadly the accredited investor, and that would have really done wonders for the regulatory practice here. So 25 lakhs to 50 lakhs. And then, of course, net worth criteria has been revised. Of course, there have been a lot of restrictions on distribution now. There is no setup fees. The PMS providers cannot pay upfront brokerage anymore. And, the brokerage, whatever they can pay is on a trail basis, and it has to come out of the earnings and not out of the capital of the PMS providers. And that is very clear. And so that has leveled the playing field in terms of, the big ticket PMS providers and the relatively smaller capitalized PMS providers, but at the same time making sure that only the serious players come in. So it has increased the net worth criteria to 5 crores. In earlier things, the investment norms were not clearly defined. Now discretionary means only listed securities, and even in non-discretionary, it's put a cap of not more than 25% in unlisted. So clearly SEBI is also distinguishing between alternate investment funds regulations as well as portfolio management services regulations here. And clearly anybody is interested in investing more into unlisted should go into products that are launched under the AIF regulations. So investment approach not defined at all in the earlier regulation, but here it talks about aggregating similar portfolios based on strategies and asset classes. Standardized reporting, of course, was not there so much, but many of them were referring to weighted average return. And here SEBI talks about time weighted rate of return clearly in terms of what is the performance that people have to show. Then it also talks about firm level as well as performance reporting, and not just at the investment approach level. So there are two approaches. One is investment approach level as well as the firm level performance reporting. And so that is a great both firm and investment approach level is a big plus than the earlier one, which was only restricted to firm level reporting. So performance audit was not required earlier, but here it is made mandatory. So that is again a big plus in terms of looking at performance and trying to make it transparent and ensuring that people are reflecting the true performance. So objectives of standardized reporting, what does it mean? Once you have a standard, that means that it reduces cherry picking by portfolio managers to showcase performances. Calculation of returns deferred from portfolio manager to portfolio manager. Model portfolio and backtesting highlighted as portfolio returns. Portfolio managers showing outsized alphas with incorrect benchmark returns. Not taking cash as part of a portfolio. Ignoring withdrawn portfolios and not highlighting changes in fundamental attributes. So even if the changes that in strategy happen or the fund manager is changed, those are also not reported. So we have seen cases in terms of how portfolio managers report performances. There is no way. In fact, if one has to do due diligence on portfolio management services, there is no standardization available, and really, everything is all about what each fund provider provides. And not only that, it doesn't even talk about why the portfolios which have been drawn down completely, or clients that have exited completely, and there is no way of saying whether the firm level portfolio performance reflects people who are dissatisfied or must have gone off not satisfied with the performance. So in all this, I think the objectives of standardized reporting would mean there is a certain level of uniformity and transparency as well, in terms, and integrity in terms of reporting both to the regulator and to the clients. So what are the benefits of time weighted rate of return? One is that fund managers try to look at in terms of timing and also in terms of sizing. So it eliminates both timing and sizing of money biases at work is eliminated. Then calculates pure return from beginning to end and true measure of manager's performance. And calculation is a stepwise approach. Of course, this is a very complicated way. And while I would show you a very simplistic way of calculation, but when it comes to actual at a large PMS provider level, it's always better to have a software that calculates the TWR and relays it, because the manual gets it very complicated. So valuation is to be done. Remember this, that valuation is to be done before each subscription or withdrawal. So computation of portfolio return, if there are no subscriptions or withdrawals, end value minus beginning value divided by the beginning value is basically simplistic. And if subscriptions or withdrawals are there, for the manager's return, we have the time weighted rate of return. For client's return, of course, because he's putting in his money, so what is his actual return is basically can be evaluated through the money weighted rate of return. But when you are evaluating a fund manager's performance, it is the only time weighted rate of return that you need to see. So here is an illustration of time weighted rate of return approach. I would not get into too much of details in terms of it, but let's look at a fairly simplistic model that I have done. Imagine somebody putting in 50 lakhs at the beginning of the year of 2019 as an initial subscription. Then there is the market value valued at 28.2, because that was before somebody is putting in an additional subscription of 5 lakhs. So since as per TWRR approach, we need to look at each sub periods before each additional subscription or redemption, and hence we have to have this period in order to calculate one sub period return. Then one again March, because there is an additional amount, additional subscription. Then till 39.99, after that additional amount, there is the market value before redemption, which comes in on 1st October of about 10 lakhs. The market value is 57 lakhs, and then a 10 lakh amount is redeemed. And then at the end of the year, that is 31/12/19, the ending market value or the closing market value is 55 lakhs. So for each of these, as you could see, you need to identify the sub period, that is the January 1 to 28. That is because there is one additional subscription happening on 1st March. So from 1st March up to 39, before the next action that is taking place, that is the redemption, that is the second sub period that you have to see. And then the 1st October to 31/12/2019, that becomes the third and the final sub period for that calendar year. So when you are looking at the sub period returns, you would calculate through the formula and look at the it's a standardized CAGR formula for each of these, and you look at the returns, and then the sub period returns, you will be linking each of them by multiplying each of them, and sub period returns plus 1, and then that is the kind of a return that you will get at 15%. So I have an Excel illustrations if you are keen that I can share with you later, but for time constraints, I won't look at the Excel at this point in time. But having said that, it's a here it appears to be simple, but when you are handling thousands of redemptions and thousands of subscriptions on a regular basis, it is too complicated to look at the manual or an Excel way of calculating. It is better to do have a software that is sophisticated enough to calculate the TWRR. So the monthly reporting formats, as I mentioned to you, the aggregated approach, the investment approach, this is the formats that SEBI is specifying in terms of the monthly report format that goes into SEBI. So this is the SEBI formula. Into each of the portfolios will be separately earmarked based on the strategies or the framework in terms of the investment approach. So, and they have to be calculated in a separate manner. So that is why if you have 3 strategies, then there could be 3 different return calculations that will happen with 3 different benchmarks. So you cannot have one single benchmark for the entire portfolio if the strategies are different. So if you have n number of investment approaches, then you have to give that accordingly. So the monthly reporting formats for clients as well. I mean, again, somebody mentioned about what are the kind of returns that we need to look at. And these are the standardized ones that have come in, and 1, 3, 5, 10 years, so that you need to show. And I think, Kamal, is it audible? Because somebody has said that I can't hear anything.
No, absolutely. This is audible. Perfectly fine.
Okay, please check your bandwidth at the end. Sometimes it happens that there could be a problem on the Wi-Fi from your end as well. Thank you. Now, then we have an annual performance audit, which is mandatory by SEBI regulations. And in that, again, you need to calculate cash and cash equivalents. You cannot avoid or remove cash and cash equivalents to give your portfolio performance. And return should be net of all expenses. Investment approach and changes should be clearly mentioned. And there should not be any variance in depicting investment approach-wise performance levels. And again, this has to be audited and audited every year, and every year after the presentation of the annual accounts within 60 days. So there is not only a mandate to do it, there is a frequency specified, and also the time bound limitation specified. Now let's look at clearly in terms of what does GIPS and SEBI standard reporting standards say. And while I said it's clearly a big step forward from SEBI, but having said that, the GIPS has also improved on it. Earlier, of course, in GIPS, the standard, there was only one criteria, that is TWRR. But GIPS has now recognized that there are multiple ways performance standards have to be presented, especially to multiple stakeholders, because they look at it in a different manner. So GIPS has improvised and tried to make it slightly bit more flexible in its latest 2020, I think, that was launched. But SEBI, I think, has still stuck to that older one of GIPS in terms of only specifying the time-weighted rate of return. So in a sense that, while the regulations have come in 27 years, it would have made sense if SEBI would have waited for the GIPS 2020 regulations and, gone through them, and maybe some of them could have been incorporated. But yes, as SEBI can make amendments from time to time, we are sure that at some point in time, both GIPS and SEBI can converge. And that way, we will make it truly best in class and as a global standard as well. So reporting format focuses on potential client reporting, whereas here focus is on regulatory and existing client reporting. So then ensuring authenticity of performance information. Here it is a voluntary thing. You can claim GIPS compliance, but you need not be subjected to verification. But SEBI has, of course, this is more stringent in terms of making the audit mandatory. So here in GIPS, the strategy implementation discretion is there, but SEBI has given the independence and full decision-making authority to the PMS providers in terms of defining the investment approach. I think this is where GIPS is more straitjacketed in terms of saying how to create and construct segregated portfolios, or what they say, composites. But here is where I think there is a potential pitfalls in terms of the giving a fair degree of flexibility. Maybe it is a beginning, maybe it is a starting point, and SEBI would like to see how it goes on, and hence it's given that leeway to the PMS providers. Return computation could be based on various issues. If the manager himself controls the cash flows, then it can be the MWRR. But if the manager doesn't control the cash flows, then it is TWRR. And in SEBI, it is TWRR alone. Reporting performance using TWRR could be misleading when the manager controls the subscription or redemption. So in many cases, we have seen PMSs are being set up by family offices, etc., where the entire discretion to manage as well as control the subscription are available to the family office. So in such a case, perhaps the reporting performance can be misleading if it is only TWRR. So performance history, I think this would answer some of the queries that have been raised. Initial performance in GIPS is up to 5 years and adding up to 10 years. But in SEBI's disclosure document, they made it mandatory only 3 years. So potential clients cannot access and assess long-term performance in case of SEBI's mandate. But in GIPS, clearly, if your history is only up to 5 years, then you can give 5 years, but you need to add up to 10 years as you keep on progressing. Benchmark, relevant benchmark only, or only TR is allowed. Total returns, that is, if somebody wants to know what is TR, then here no guidance on performance indicators or benchmarks yet. But I understand that some of the agencies like CRISIL, etc., at least for AIFs, are trying to provide or develop benchmarks. So it would be good to see the PMS network also getting together and trying to organize some independent agencies like CRISIL or somebody looking at performance indicators or benchmarks. Yet terminated accounts in GIPS must be a part. So that is part of the historical track record. so that no client is missed out if the client belongs to the composite. But SEBI doesn't give any guidance on the terminated accounts. So clearly there is a big risk of survivorship bias in case of the even the new regulations. So switching of accounts between composites, historical track record must be part of earlier composite, but there is no guidance again on SEBI. Then this is again a risk of survivorship bias. Then policy of procedures must also be measured. So there is no guidance in terms of what are the policies and whether they are mentioned in the application. There is no lack of internal control, and governance can also be a risk here. So risk measures are also specified in GIPS, but SEBI doesn't give any risk measures. So books and records for all data and for all time periods need to be preserved in GIPS, and in SEBI there is no guidance. So this is basically largely the presentation. I think 40 minutes is up. It's 6:09, and with that, I now look at answering. Kamal, over to you. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Kamal?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're done, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And now, we can take the questions and answers. Am I audible?
Yeah, Kamal, you're audible.
Perfectly fine. So first of all, there are a couple of basic questions that we can cover, which audience has asked. First basic question is: does a PMS license automatically cover RIA license? In which case, do you need separately an RIA license if you already have a PMS license?
So it doesn't automatically cover RIA license, but earlier I think there were firms taking that latitude in terms of having a PMS license. They didn't apply for an RIA license because largely PMS license used to serve that requirement that they wanted in terms of advice. One is through PMS, what can you do? You can charge fees, you can do profit sharing, you can manage discretionary as well as non-discretionary. You can even provide advisory. So the PMS becomes a large composite in that sense. But for example, a wealth manager or an RIA, I think the job is much more in terms of a broader than just restricting it to PMS. Now PMS regulations have come with limitations that were not there earlier. For example, in terms of dealing with unlisted securities, PMS doesn't provide any guidance on that. In fact, it is restrictive. So in that sense, the RIA license will be more, permissive in that sense. Then I would say that if you are looking at a broader mandate in terms of your wealth manager as a family office, etc., a multi-family office as an advisor, looking at governance and looking at a lot of other products and other investment strategies which are not part of the ambit of PMS, then you would be, I think, limited in terms of what you can do in terms of the scope for the PMS, because the new guidelines typically have some limitations in terms of what PMS can do and not do. The earlier regulations were not very clear in that sense, so people used to have that latitude in terms of taking advantage of the PMS license. Does that answer, Kamal?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
The next question pertains to the reporting of TWRR numbers. So while calculating the TWRR numbers, are they supposed to be done on retrospective basis or from the returns which will be reported from 1st October onwards?
Yeah, though I think the clear guidelines need to be studied, but clearly SEBI has specified that at least 3 years of performance need to be reflected. So it has to be, when you are looking at 3 years, that means you are looking at 3 years out of which some part of it will be retrospective, right?
So basically, all the AMCs which have been publishing numbers till now, will those historical numbers also change?
The framework will change, and you have to define the composites, and you have to look at the investment approach. Now, when you define that and you segregate all these portfolios, then you can bucket all these client portfolios into just as AMCs had that issue with categorization. I think there will be some bit of complexity in terms of at least in the initial stage, in terms of looking at the investment approach, then bucketing them into an investment approach, and providing the right benchmark, and then looking at the performance returns, right? So there will be, I think, certain degree of difficulty at the initial stage, because you need to first define your investment approach, then segregate those client portfolios into respective investment approaches, which at GIPS, at least we call it as GIPS, and composites. And then after putting that, then identify the right kind of a benchmark for that, and then looking at performance based on that. So when you are looking at it, there is a fair degree of complexity and a certain amount of I would say retrospection will be there in terms of reflecting the past performance. So otherwise, how would you do that?
Right. So while calculating the TWR return method, should one be considering unit based, or it will be value based, and whether it will be a model or it will be on the overall basis?
I think both I think SEBI is permitting both the approaches. So you can either reduce it to units which were not there earlier. I think earlier there was no concept of units and PMS. That can come through, but both the approaches are permitted as per my understanding.
Right. So and the TWR calculations can be done on the aggregated pooled portfolio as well as model portfolio, or it is only on aggregated pooled portfolio?
So now, because you are doing an investment approach method, there won't be any model portfolio, right? Because your entire thing about reflecting the performance is not based on model portfolio anymore. It has to be based on the composite that is arriving at. So the concept of model portfolio, which used to mislead a lot of investors, will not be anymore there. It will be true returns of the entire set of portfolios that will be reflected. So there is no question of a model portfolio here. So what people used to do is use simulated portfolio, or have a portfolio which was not related to any client, but basically based on a certain date and certain design, and that also was not faithfully being reflected in the client portfolios at any stage, because there was always wide deviations. And with that investment approach, I think the model portfolio way of comparison goes out, and SEBI is not recognizing the model portfolio approach anymore.
Right.
So that is what standardization is.
Right.
Because earlier model portfolio provided no clear standards.
Right. And is there any extent of derivatives that can be used in the new regulations in PMS structure?
Entire regulations that I covered, didn't really cover any part of derivatives per se. And my understanding is, I think they can only do it. One thing is, anyway, leverage of any kind is not provided. And I am not sure to what extent derivatives can be used. If they can be used, maybe they can be used only as a hedge, but otherwise no. But my understanding on this is the new regulations don't cover derivatives at this point in time. Rather, they have put restrictions on unlisted securities, etc. Earlier also, I think there was no provision for derivatives in PMS, and hence the requirement of AIF under the category 3.
If there is a change in the fund manager in PMS under new guidelines, does a portfolio management company need to inform it to existing investors?
Kamal, I missed that. Can you come again?
If there is a change in the portfolio manager or any strategy, does a portfolio management company need to inform it to existing investors?
Yeah, so as part of the performance audit, it forms as part of reporting formats, both in terms of client as well as SEBI reporting formats, it forms part of the standardization. So it is part of the standardization attempt in terms of, and also it has to be part of the performance audit as I had shown it to you earlier. So let me just go through it. Yeah, investment approach and changes should be clearly mentioned.
Coming to the new RIA guidelines, so most of the RIAs, which are there in India, are individual RIAs, and as per the new guidelines, both RIA advisory as well as execution can coexist, as you mentioned, by segregating at the client level. So, from the perspective of an individual RIA, how this coexistence can be practically implemented? What are the various possibilities?
No, I think SEBI is clear in terms of saying as an individual RIA, there is no question of coexisting anymore. So in a sense that they have already quashed it. So the any way you are trying to coexist as an individual RIA will be tantamount to at least violation of SEBI's principles in spirit. You might find a legal way out of it, but at least the regulations don't envisage. So how you do it, maybe it is legal. You might work a way out. Maybe have a corporate at one end with remote distancing from the individual distributor or something like that. I don't know how, but yes, I mean.
Right. But what are your... Please continue. Please complete if you have anything to say.
No, I think there is a lot of questions on the advisory side of it. Again, from an advisory side, I don't know whether SEBI at this point in time is envisaging any kind of uniform standardization, because on the RIA side itself, they have not provided standardization. On the PMS side also, SEBI recognizes that an advisory means, there is no discretion or no control on the funds. It is mere advice. It is mere, by exchange of recommendations from the portfolio manager, and portfolio manager has no control over the performance of the portfolio. In such a case, how do you provide portfolio performance in that? I think that is the clear distinction that SEBI has made for advisory kind of mandates. So to that extent, I think advisory mandates still have that laxity, whereas the non-discretionary and discretionary may not have that laxity, because they still have the control over the performance of the portfolio. Advisory portfolios don't have control, because then the entire discretion is on the client. So what SEBI is trying to make is try to understand whether you have a control on the client's money to manage. Do you have the discretion or not? If you don't have that discretion, then leave it leave it to the client. So there need not be any standardization.
So, when SEBI in the new RIA guidelines is trying to segregate for a corporate RIA, is giving the authority to corporate RIA to operate both by segregating the clients. Isn't it binding the client ultimately, because there are different types of products and some products are not available, for example, at a direct model. So from the perspective of client, he would have to maybe pay a double fee. He will have to take a product which is available at a higher fee, because the direct option may not be available. And at the same time, will also have to pay fee to the advisor.
Yeah, so as I said, while SEBI has gone a step forward in, laying out some clear guidelines, there are still anomalies that exist. And at the same time, of course, but to answer your question, really, SEBI also has attempted to answer that in terms of saying, asking or directing AIFs and PMSs to have direct option as well. So it isn't anymore that only MFs have that availability. It is also, it is also the other, I would say that PMS and AIFs also can have direct launches without brokerage.
Right, but most of the PMSs, because they are small firms, boutique firms, may not want to get into the client side of management, because that would have that will kind of distract their asset management businesses, and they are boutique firms. So in that context, is it a binding on all the PMSs to come up with direct code, or it is an option given to them?
I think it is an option at this point in time, because if you don't have direct, you don't have direct. But over a period, if you want to grow, that means that the fund provider who doesn't have an option, see, they have not given an RIA. RIA has to do only direct business. RIA cannot do commission-based business. So the option for RIA to do a commission-based business is not there anymore. So they have tried to plug that loophole at the RIA end.
And given that in Indian context, the maturity of investor is yet to evolve, what are your personal views in regards to the RIA guidelines? Are they early in time, or they are in line with the level of maturity and penetration of investment products in Indian context?
So my reading is that they have only placed an additional channel. They have not killed the existing channel that is there through product commissions to basically supplant it with an RIA channel. So, and I think SEBI has also gone ahead and said that both the channels will coexist for a long time to come. Neither have they given any time or the deadline for, or any kind of deadline from where MFDs will cease to exist and only RIA will function. So in that sense, I think SEBI has also understood that there could be markets or clients which may not who may not have access to advisory, because advisory, to make it viable, would mean that they will only service a particular segment of clients. So in that sense, I think they have understood that in order to penetrate and give access to some bit of advice, then MFD's presence is also required. So hence they are trying to at least at this point in time, the thinking is that both channels will coexist, and they won't kill anybody. And by virtue of actually reducing, in earlier 2013, I was talking about there were not sufficient incentives for the RIAs to really apply for license and become an RIA. Now there are sufficient incentives in terms of products on the direct mode are getting available. Then the fees that have been given to MFDs as brokerage, they have also come down fairly substantially. In that sense, there is a fair bit of attempt towards level playing field as well that has come about.
From the perspective of practically implementing the RIA as well as distribution in the corporate structure, right? So there are large firms, wealth management companies, as well as banks. For them, showing the arm's length distance is easier because they are well established and they have bigger teams, different offices. But for a new company or a small firm which has maybe 5, 7, 10 people in the team, if they decide to take corporate RIA license and try to showcase the arm's length distance and practically and ethically and responsibly follow that, how is that possible? What are the nuances which one has to take care? And how can practically a small firm implement the arm's length distance without getting into any problems?
So, for SEBI, what they are saying as a reasonably large distributor is, if you are an IFA, say, for example, or as a MFD with more than 150 clients, then you have to corporatize that and demutualize your entity. So in that sense, they are already making a stipulation that you cannot handle as a retail more than 150 clients. So in that sense, the moment you are an RIA and you are handling more than 150 clients, you have to corporatize. And by virtue of corporatizing, you have to set up systems and checks in place to implement all that. Or the other way out is actually look at, what practice that is happening is some way of consolidating where 2 or 3 RIAs will come in and, set up a platform. So that I think is a more viable way to do it. And that is how I think SEBI is trying to make sure that these people can also thrive.
Can you please elaborate this last point? 2, 3 RIAs will come and set up the platform.
Yeah, what I meant was the trend that is happening in the marketplace is that 2 or 3 RIAs are coming in and setting up a platform and they're catering to their clients. So in that sense, they have the scale, they will have the manpower as well as the capital required. So that what you were mentioning about a limitation in terms of systems and checks, as well as the compliance issues and clearly identifying who are brokerage clients and who are advisory clients, those kind of issues will not be there.
You mean to say if there is a large player which comes up with a direct platform, all the IFAs will kind of become partner to that platform and segregate?
That is one model that is already existing. Like there are a lot of electronic platforms that are there. But what I am saying is 2 or 3 of of right-minded individuals who are clearly aligned with each other and who maybe are distinct market players. Like I know, for example, there are players in Pune who fairly large player in Pune who has come around and got together with a player in Mumbai and a player in Guwahati, etc. And they have set up a unified venture now. So those kind of examples can increase now because of the SEBI stipulation.
Right. And what is the legal meaning of arm's length distance in the corporate RIA?
So I think what SEBI is saying that if it at the client level they have to have distinction, then there is a clearly segregated division that you need to have, or you need to better still is you need to have a separate entity with where the advisory team can be seated, and a separate entity where MFDs are. Then of course there are qualified there is a qualification criteria for advisory personnel, which is different from distributor personnel. So all these would really mean that you have an arm's length relationship at that point in time. So where it's not be seen that you are working together in the same place, sitting at the same place, and having common manpower, managing responsibilities for both distribution and advisory.
So is it to do with where all these different people are sitting, or is it to do with different companies?
So one is a clear way to distinguish that by virtue of saying two clear companies, you are making it arm's length anyway, because you will have a separate bank account, separate PAN number, everything will be separate. But then SEBI has that entity of where you can set up a division, right? If you have a separate division within the same company as an advisory division, then there is a problem. If you have a common manpower there, so there you need to distinguish how your stream of income from advisory, where it's better to have a separate bank account in such a case. Maybe have a separate operations, that would be even clearer. But I'm not sure how many are following that. But as long as you don't have the same set of people having responsibilities for mutual fund distribution as well as RIA, then it is fine. Say you have an advisory head and you have a sales head, and both have different responsibilities and different segments and different clients and different teams, then you have a fair amount of, and they don't interact regularly on that. So then you have an arm's length relationship. But yes, it is very difficult to prove if it is within the same division.
Based on your practical experience of more than 2 decades, how do you view, now when we know the RI guidelines have firmed up, how do you view, next maybe 3 years evolving in this context? Will we see, many IFAs, many distributors ultimately accepting the RIA route and taking the RIA license, or there will be still a lot of apprehensions, as we have seen over the last 7 years? Many times, SEBI has kind of tried and come up with a lot of consultation papers, but it has still not led to many people opting for RIA route.
Yeah, so I think there will be now for the next 3 years, from a regulatory perspective, I expect some degree of stabilization. I think one reason why there have not been many entries so far is there was utter confusion at the end in terms of how to make the RIA business viable, and what is the kind of, whether SEBI itself had some clarity in terms of whether it wants to promote RIA business or not. I think there is certain degree of clarity that has come in. So I'm not saying that big numbers might come in the next 3 years, but I will say that there will be clearly people who would say that, this is my model and not the distribution business. So, and then there is by virtue of the, the fees coming down, the brokerage fees coming down fairly steeply, I think there is a fair amount of, I think, stability or level playing field between the MFD and the RIA at this point in time. So, and even RIA is not at this point in time not very unattractive if you look at it only as a sole, as an individual looking to set up a model. And not only that, I think over a period, clients also will understand the value of being true fiduciary with a minimum conflict of interest. So to that extent, I think the trend in future, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I can't say, will be towards somebody whom the client can trust, and whom the client sees that has no vested interest or trying to offer products simply because the revenue there is the consideration.
Right, Rajinder. So we are bang on time. It's absolutely 1 hour. If you have anything more to add in terms of guidance, in terms of your words of wisdom, you can give your final comments.
All I can say is, particularly on the PMS side, some of them, in fact, many of the regulations are yet to be implemented. So these are early days yet. And I am sure that like any new set of regulations, there will be a fair bit of dialogue and exchange of, I think, information and ideas. I think Kamal's this platform is one of it, and this is just an attempt. I am here, just to provide the clarity that I have understood, or we at CFA Society India have understood to that extent, and provide you. But I am sure that we will not have all the answers, because the regulator itself has to clarify a lot of points that many of you have raised, and particularly on the advisory side, where there is no clarity in terms of whether you can be permitted to do certain things or not. Also on the derivative side, some of you have raised questions, but my thing is that the scope of the regulations really don't cover too much on the derivative side. So we need to again maybe go back and check with the regulator and find out to what extent. And let me tell you that these things, again, to get a clarification takes their time, because again regulators have to think through if they have not thought through yet. But in terms of the regulators, my only final words to that is, whenever there is a scope for discretion, there is ambiguity or scope for gray area, I would say that leave it to the regulator to decide on that, rather than we as individuals, as fund managers or PMS providers or intermediaries to decide. Because anything that is gray area can actually be something that the regulator has thought the other way. So we cannot outthink the regulator has I think their own way to decide. For example, I think there was one question in terms of whether advisors can charge profit sharing. I think that question came in at the early days of RIA regulations 1993, and some people went back, and SEBI replied in a very ambiguous fashion that at this point this is not envisaged. So then I think what SEBI meant was this is not part of the scope for RIA regulations. But then it's an ambiguity, right? SEBI is not saying yes or no here. But in the new set of regulations, actually SEBI is trying to micromanage and stipulate what RIA should charge as a fixed fee or as a AUM fee. So in that sense, there is a fair bit of detailing that is going in. So if that is there, and in that then there is no profit sharing covered at all, then I would say that let us not take the risk of actually charging a profit share. So got it, Kamal? That's I think what I said is that in terms of ambiguity, leave it to the regulator to qualify.
Right. So with this, we will end this webinar. Thank you very much, Rajendra, for your insightful views, and thank you everyone for attending. Rajendra, can we take your favor, because there have been many questions?
Mm-hmm.
Can we will try and make a note around it, and we'll share that with you for you to edit, and then we'll kind of circulate to everybody who has registered for this webinar.
Yeah, fair enough. So if there are still unanswered questions, you can send it to me. I will try to answer them as well.
Perfect. Right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kamal. Thanks everyone for your time.
Perfect. Right. Thank you so much.